President Museveni's victory drive on Thursday from his countryside home in Rwakitura, western Uganda, through rural central Uganda en route to Kampala was a testament of his fading halo in the region that once served as his sanctuary during the Bush War struggle.
The Electoral Commission,
Justice Simon Byabakama's Electoral Commission last Saturday declared Museveni winner of Thursday's presidential election with 58.64% of the total valid votes cast, while his closest challenger Kyagulanyi, who is under house arrest, garnered 34.83% of the 9.9 million valid votes cast. Kyagulanyi has since claimed that the election was the most fraudulent in the history of Uganda. In sharp contrast, President Museveni says this was the most cheating-free election in Uganda's history. Whereas cameras tried to embellish images of pockets of crowds clad in yellow t-shirts, what was supposed to be a triumphant return to the city after Museveni's re-election was largely lukewarm. The president's dismal performance in Buganda, according to some observers, is largely a culmination of an alliance that gradually frayed at the edges after government took its foot off the gas pedal, leaving the red beret to sweep away the last yellow flag posts precariously hanging across the sub-region. Earlier on in January 2020, the president, perhaps aware that there was a growing groundswell of resentment in Buganda, commenced a 6-day 195-kilometer trek in Luweero, a march which was meant to rekindle his interest in a region that warmly embraced him at his hour of need. But this was perhaps a little too late. To some analysts, the result in the region that placed his key rival Robert Kyagulanyi nearly at 70%, to many was a repudiation of his policies and governance record that was curtly summed up by his Minister for Trade and Industry, Amelia Chambade, who is among a scores of ministers defeated during the parliamentary seat races.
Have we granted the youth sufficient space in our governance? No. Have we empowered the youth sufficiently? Yes and no. For me, I must admit that it has been a big omission, because I found Mawokota in a quagmire. Everything was not there. There was no water, no electricity, no nothing.
In his victory address last Saturday, Museveni, who appeared in combative mood, tried to shrug off the loss, attributing it to sectarianism.
You get frustrations among the people. People get frustrated. Some sections of the people. So what happens? Then opportunities come in. For instance, the sectarian groups. Now, in some of the voting, the pattern which we saw is very interesting. You can see some of that. Where now, instead of people looking of how to solve the socio-economic issues of the people, they now bring back sectarianism. Like you saw the voting, for instance, in Buganda.
The same line has been peddled by the president's acolytes.
Why did other ministers elsewhere come back? So that argument that Buganda ministers or ministers from Buganda lost because they were non-performers, to me it is uncalled for. It's not true. The truth is known. This wave of sectarianism swept us.
It was Buganda versus the rest of Uganda. When you look at the satellite view, this is a very fundamental equation. And it appears that tribalism is starting to emerge.
Ibrahim Semujunganda, the Kira municipality MP, told NTV that the sectarian talk is misplaced.
You see, I am surprised both by Museveni but also by the media itself. Buganda is the most cosmopolitan place in Uganda. The people who voted against Museveni are not necessarily Buganda. It is just the geography, the area called Buganda that voted against him. In the constituency where I'm an MP, you have Bateso, you have Basoga, you have Karamajong, you have Achoris, you have so you have all sorts of communities. So it's very difficult to find any area in Uganda that is inhabited by only Baganda. I think Museveni simply failed to find a reason why he lost in this geographical area.
He also gave reasons why the president lost in Buganda.
Elections under Museveni, 1996. Museveni had never lost to Buganda and Busoga. I am very, very happy that this time he did. These two areas have voted for Museveni throughout. I don't understand why this is being made to look like a very big story. Because Museveni in the past has lost Acholi, at one time he lost to Teso, he lost to Western Nile, he keeps losing Lango. Maybe the importance of Uganda, the geography, and then the population is what makes this a bigger story than the loss in other areas of the country.
In the 1996 election, Paul Kawanga Semogere, the DP party presidential candidate, was overwhelmingly voted in northern Uganda, but lost in his home turf in Buganda, which was attributed to an aggressive smear campaign run by the Museveni camp, including claiming that Semogere planned to allow Obote to return from exile once voted. During the campaigns, skulls of the Luweero bush struggle were put on display to evoke the bitter memories of the UPC regime accused of orchestrating a terror campaign. Data for the subsequent elections shows that voters in Central Region, Kampala inclusive, continued to vote for Museveni than any other candidate. But with the sub-region including parts like Luweero lagging behind in terms of service delivery and the growing numbers of disillusioned youths without jobs, the grounds began to slip away from the firm control of the ruling party. In the 2001, 2006 and 2011 general election, FDC's presidential candidate Kizza Besigye, who came second in the polls, whose results he contested in the Supreme Court, only won in one district, Kampala. FDC's strength further improved in the 2016 elections, with Besigye making significant inroads in Kampala with 65%, Wakiso with 59% and Masaka with 50.97%. When Kyagulanyi announced his presidential bid in mid-2019, regime officials initially wrote him off as an embodiment of Buganda ethno-nationalism.
People tend to vote in a different way because of the threats that they face or because of interests that they want to protect. In the just concluded American elections, the Latino voted differently, the African Americans voted differently, the white people. So in every election, there will be geographical, there will be other interests, either demographic. So for a particular region, because Karamoja keeps voting Museveni 90%, why isn't that tribalism? Ankole keeps voting Museveni, why isn't that tribalism?
What brings statements like tribalism, things like sectarianism in kinds of religion and all this, is because of some of the statements of some of the leaders, which I think we must desist from. We must desist from this because it makes us to in a situation of being isolated, which we don't want. We don't want to be isolated as Central Region. We don't want to be isolated as Buganda.
Political analyst Timothy Kalyegira argued that the voting patterns were merely a manifestation of Buganda's pent-up anger.
So I guess this NUP is a climax. But in what specific way? Because you listen in, land is a great deal. You listen to all these TV stations, the radio stations, social media. Buganda is bleeding land. Many Buganda have been complaining about evicting their families from their land, especially in the northern part of Buganda, starting from Kono Kayunga and going northward, square miles of land actually or allegedly owned by army generals or people in the government. The youth population in Buganda, based here where most of Uganda's economy is, seeing all these high-rise buildings go up, seeing people who you sure came to power in 1986 dressed barely in rags, and today they own half the country, have all these high-rise buildings, and most of this quote-unquote investment you see is being built within Kampala, the wider Wakiso and Entebbe area. So of course the resentment is felt much deeper here.
For long spells, the NRM has projected Buganda as a major ally, largely after its monarch under Kabaka Mwenda Mutebi was restored in 1993 after the region provided ground to the NRA rebels led by Museveni fighting the Milton Obote II regime early in the 1980s. To further placate Buganda, the regime has usually given coveted positions to a Muganda, from ministerial appointments to the prime ministers including Kintu Musoke and Apollon Sibambi, and vice presidents including Samson Kiseka, Gilbert Bukenya and Edward Sekandi. Over the years, the regime and the monarch have feuded over, among others, the question of federal power and privilege, the return of a Biaffe, property that was taken by the Obote central government in 1966, amongst others. But it's during the last 15 years that this relationship has significantly diminished, especially after the deadly September 2009 Buganda riots, where hundreds of youths were killed and dozens rounded up and kept in detention until towards the 2011 elections. Since then, the monarch and the regime have maintained a love-hate relationship marred by mistrust.
Now, if you hear a Muganda talking, Funga Baganda, you know he's an enemy of Buganda, number one. And secondly, an enemy of Uganda and an enemy of Africa. And we shall crush those enemies, as we have done in the past. Yeah. You preach your nonsense, we shall answer you by word. And if you go beyond word and want something else, you also get it. This is not the first time. We have had this before. We have had this before, because we had groups. Otherwise, why did Uganda have problems? Bantus against Nilotics, Nilotics against Bantu. These were the rubbish of 1966.
In November last year, military personnel killed at least 54 people, injured dozens, while hundreds were arrested and are yet to be tried in court during protests that broke out in Kampala following the arrest of Kyagulanyi in Luka district for flouting COVID-19 campaign regulations. According to Kalyegira, this fractured the already strained relationship.
The arrogance of the NRM, if you know it, we shall crush you, we shall finish you. 54 people have died in the streets during riots. Not a word of sorry, not a word of apology, not a sense of, emotional contrition, not a sense of empathy. And you think you're just going to give us pictures of Uganda Airlines planes and new markets in Soroti and new Entebbe Expressway and say, you see, securing a future. Excuse me, we're not animals, we're human beings. So we are human beings, have feelings. You don't just say, because I'm going to give you like a new high-rise building or a new market, I should vote you and ignore your insensitivity to who I am.
It remains to be seen how Museveni will respond. Will he dispense an olive branch, or will he punish the region for voting against him?
Need to really go back on the drawing board and say, yes, this must have been a protest vote. This is a mirror. This actually showing us, when you go for election, it's a mirror. It's a mirror that actually tells you, and you don't need to fight the mirror. You just need to work on your face.
In defining the president, he has two important advantages to him. One, he believes in long-term thought and long-term strategy. And now this has happened, it will give him fodder for a long-term food for thought. Meaning that he will sit back and have a deep reflection over it. I'm quite sure about that. Two, he also has a deep reflection on history and a deep reflection on revolution. Now, knowing that these two constitute his strength in persona, I think they would help him in reflecting on this and seeing how to solve this jigsaw.
Political scientist Kiseka Ntale told NTV Museveni will attempt to exploit the situation.
He is not the kind of person who is used to being rejected, and more so being rejected by people he perceives who he has known to be of his own. Most importantly, the people from where he cultivated the 5-year rebellion, saying outright no. I think that is kind of a loud bell for him to listen to. And I'm very sure the Buganda conversation is going to be a very big preoccupation over the next 5 years.
Ntale discounted the sectarianism discourse and says Buganda was sending a message by the way it voted.
If we look at this in a tribalist lens, is to be reductionist, and we shall lose the bigger picture. Why? Because African politics is constructed around tribal collections, and there is no shame around that. Our states are founded not on the patriotic fundamentals, rather collected around tribal groupings. It happens in Kenya, it happens in South Africa, it happens in Nigeria.
This election has shown us kind of an ugly side of Uganda we had not been prepared for in 2021, which was sort of the regionalization of the voting. Block vote for Bobi Wine in Buganda. Solid block vote for Museveni in Western Uganda. Voting by block, the kind we see in Kenya. Then where does Patrick Amuriat get his largest number of votes? Eastern Uganda, the Nilo-Hamitic Eastern Uganda, not even the Bantu Eastern Uganda, the Samia, the Gisu, but the Nilo-Hamitic, Teso, Karamoja and whatnot.
NRM's loss and Museveni's winning star power in Buganda can easily be discounted. Museveni can look at the gains he made in West Nile and Northern Uganda where he won, perhaps giving his victory a national appeal. On the other hand, Kyagulanyi will need to show that he can galvanize support across the country. But for one to comfortably rule, they will need Buganda, which is the economic pulse of the country, on board.